Center. We had a series of lecture on the theme Wider Contextualized Biblical Spirituality, beginning from 7th of May. So far, we had 11 lectures from different eminent biblical scholars. This evening will be the last lecture for this series. We have a great biblical scholar and a very dynamic leader, Reverend Dr. Mani Chako, the General Secretary of the Bible Society of India. And I'm proud to say he was also the former director of ECC. This evening, the session will be moderated by Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti, an erudite biblical scholar on Johannine Gospel, presently working at the Union Biblical Seminary, Pune. So I now invite Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti to moderate the sessions. And I also request him to introduce the speaker for this evening. Over to you, sir.
Opportunity and privilege to introduce today's speaker, who is none other than Reverend Dr. Mani Chako. As it is already mentioned, he is currently the General Secretary of the Bible Society of India, having his theological education in SIBS, Bangarapet, UTC Bangalore, and the University of London. Did his PhD in Old Testament under the well-known scholar Ari Clements. He was professor of Old Testament and head of the Department of Old Testament Studies at Gurukul Lutheran Theological College and Research Institute in Chennai. He was principal of Gurukul Lutheran Theological College and Research Institute in Chennai, and he was the former director of Ecumenical Christian Center, Bangalore. And I had the unique privilege to study under him in Gurukul, Chennai. So I'm very happy to introduce today's speaker, and he is going to speak on the topic, immigrant God amid immigrant people. So over to you, Achan.
Can't hear. Hello?
Yes.
Here, is it audible? I don't know.
Yes, it is.
Is it clear? Something wrong with the internet? All of you can hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead, Achan.
Okay. Father Dr. Matthew Chandan Kundal, my dear friend and colleague, who is heading now the Ecumenical Christian Center, where I had the privilege of being the director there before I moved on to the Bible Society of India. And my dear friend, Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti, who had been a great source of inspiration ever since Gurukul, the way he molded himself to what he is today, has always been a source of great. Some other students are also here, and the way they come up in life, and the way they are what they are today. Gives me to speak on a theme which has been very dear to my heart these days. It has been very the migrant God amid migrant people. Am I audible? I hope I'm audible. Wider contextual biblical spirituality. And this general theme of this series of lectures is very much in line with the vision of the founder of the Ecumenical Christian Center, late Reverend Dr. M.A. Thomas, who always believed in an inclusive, contextualized, Bible-based ecumenism. For this theme, migrant government, migrant people, I personally believe it fits in very well to the general theme of the
Sachin, some disturbance. It is not audible as well as not. Your sound is breaking.
Manichan, if there is a problem with the video, maybe you can switch off the video, which will give a strength to your line, and then you can go on. Hello.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes, yes.
it would be good to make a call to him and request him to come only on audio as Father Chadrakundan has suggested.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Know. Well, I'll go on. There's something wrong with internet connectivity, but I'll go on. So the word wider indicates inclusivity, and the second term, contextual, indicates not withdrawal but engagement. So it should be a spirituality of engagement. And biblical, well, it's a very problematic word, biblical. Many people ask me the question, is it necessary to interpret the Bible to understand a theme or to understand an issue from a biblical perspective? Isn't it already given to you? Why do you interpret the Bible? So I've had several arguments with several of my friends in the church and in the world at large. And I tried to sort of convince them and argue with them, saying biblical interpretation is absolutely necessary to relate the text to the context. And I used to tell them that there are two ways of reading the Bible or interpreting the Bible. And that is, number one, an integrated reading of the Bible, and number two, a perspectival reading of the Bible. Integrated reading of the Bible indicates not just selecting one text, but rather looking at the Bible as a whole and how the Bible looks at the theme or subject of concern as a whole. I also tell them that there is another way of reading the Bible, which is very important, that is perspectival reading of the Bible. That means adopting a perspective in reading the Bible. The normal perspective which I adopt when I read the Bible to deal with a topic of concern is the perspective of the life in all its fullness, which Jesus come to offer to So therefore, I tell my friends that interpreting the Bible is very well for us in the context we live. And then contextual. I ask myself the question always, what is spirituality really? And in the context of the three other terms which I have tried to explain, wider, contextualized, biblical, spirituality. Spirituality is something which has to deal with or which concerns with the something higher, with the supreme or with the higher, with something higher. At the same time, it is something which has to do with the other who sits next to you, the other who lives next to you, the other who you deal with on a daily basis. So therefore, the spirituality we are talking about is not a spirituality which is purely personal. Of course, spirituality does have a personal dimension, but the spirituality which we are concerned about in today's context, in today's world, is a wider, contextualized, biblical spirituality. It is in that kind of with that kind of an explanation that I just want to get into my topic, migrant God amid migrant people. Now, the main reason why I was led to choose this theme, migrant God amid migrant people, when Dr. Johnson asked me to speak to all of you, is the issue of migration which we are facing today in today's world. It was only this morning I was deeply heartbroken when I saw a little child, maybe 1 year, 1.5 years old child. The mother is lying dead in the railway station after having traveled long distance from somewhere, and her body was thrown onto the platform, and the little child, not knowing whether the mother is alive or not, the child comes and pats on the shoulders of the mother, 1 year old child or 1.5 year old child. And there are a number of such scenes which have flashed through our TV screens and in our newspapers these days. How the migrant workers suffer even today and have suffered over the months, and how they will carry on their life even after reaching their hometowns. Now, it is this kind of a current scenario which led me this short presentation as migrant God among migrant people. Now, before the COVID-19, there were other factors which disturbed us. At least it has disturbed me. the government came up with the Citizens Amendment Act, National Register for Citizens, National Population Register. Now, all these, as far as the government is concerned, these are for the common good. But as far as the people who have migrated from other countries long ago, they were living in fear and asking themselves what these exercises of the government will finally result in. Will they give up? Will they have to go back to their country? And if so, how will they go back? Will their own home country accept them? On the part of the government, it is a normal procedure. But for many people who have no documents to prove their identity, they were concerned about their future, mainly the migrant workers, people who work as migrant laborers and who have come to our country long back. And now we are facing this theme of migration in a much more closer manner ever since the COVID pandemic has dawned on us. We live in a world on the move. In the global economy, we voluntarily relocate for jobs, education, sightseeing, and we also constantly relocate involuntarily because of oppression, conflict, and natural disasters. Now, according to sociologists, they say displacement and migration have become the dominant theme or themes of our age. There is massive movement of people from one place to the other. It is not just the migrant workers I am having in mind. All of us in one way or the other are migrants, coming from one place to another for work or for other purposes. There are so many people on the move. We live in a world on the move. And many times when we move from one place to another, we think we can easily fit in to that new context, which is not true and which need not be true always. We try to assimilate into the new context. But many a time, assimilation doesn't work for some reason or the other. And as a result, we try to live in isolation. Maybe because we are not accepted by the people of another place we have moved into. Now, this theme of migration has got different dimensions. It's got political, it's got social, it's got cultural. And many a time, people deal with this theme from a political point of view, or from a cultural point of view, or from a social point of view. Now, this evening, I do not wish to deal with this topic from a political or from a cultural point of view. Me, myself being a theologian and a student of the Bible, would like to deal with this theme of migration basically from a theological perspective. But before I go into theology, I may touch upon the theme from a psychological dimension as well. Now, for me, spirituality is rooted in theology. A sound theology is very essential for a sound spirituality. As I made a statement a little earlier, a spiritual person is an ecumenical person. Now, how does a spiritual person become an ecumenical person? Because of his understanding of God. So therefore, a sound theology, a well-balanced sound theology based on the Bible is absolutely essential to become a true spiritual person, to understand what true spirituality is. And therefore, I thought I'll spend a few moments with all of you, my dear friends, to look at this theme of migration from a theological perspective. But before I go to that, I may touch upon a little bit of psychology as well. Now, my basic thesis of this short presentation is that the God of the Bible, who I understand, who I have tried long to understand, who I am still struggling to understand. Many a time we understand God as a God of distance, not as a God of nearness, God sitting up there. But the more you struggle in life, and the more you struggle with the understanding of the God of the Bible, the more you come to realize God is not distant, but God is near. It is the nearness of God which has always attracted me, which has sustained me, and which is making me move forward in my life journey. Now, when I look at the God of the Bible as a God of nearness, one aspect which comes to my mind is the God of the Bible is a migrant God. God is God's self, or himself, or herself, a migrant. This is the basic thesis of my short presentation. And it is this God of the Bible, who himself is a migrant God, who is with the migrant people who are struggling with various sorts of things in today's context. Now, in the physical sense, migration is simply, as I said, leaving from one place to another. Physical sense. You board a flight, you go to Australia or somewhere, and you try to settle down there. In the physical sense, it sounds very easy, very exciting. And you look forward to seeing your relatives, you look forward to seeing a new place, and you look forward to working in a good company, and so on and so forth, for different reasons. In a physical sense, migration is exciting because it is simply leaving from one place to the other. But there is a deeper dimension of migration, and that is emotional and spiritual, and what I call the inner shape of migration. And this inner shape of migration is much more complex than the physical. Physical migration is easy because you move from one place to the other, but the emotional, the spiritual, or the psychological dimensions of the migrant experience is much more complex than physical. Relocating a self that was formed and nurtured in one place to reside in a brand new environment will definitely have a deep impact on oneself. I'm particularly reminded of my own experience in the United Kingdom when I was doing my doctoral research. I call myself as a migrant. I come from the state of Kerala, as all of you know. At the moment, I'm in Bangalore. I've worked in different places. I've gone through different countries. And one of the places where I had the privilege of living, studying, and working is the United Kingdom, particularly in London, attached to a church which belongs to the Church of England. Now, when I went to the United Kingdom, it was with great excitement, physically. With my wife and our eldest son, we three had the privilege of moving to London, not knowing what was awaiting us in London. We went there and we were warmly welcomed by my sponsors, and they also had organized a beautiful home for us, given to us by a church which belonged to the Church of England, on the understanding that I would help out the church on Sundays, assisting as a curate, assisting the vicar of the church. I had no problems, and I was excited physically to be present in that house and to be of assistance to the church or to the vicar. But what attracted me was not the United Kingdom or the London, or rather even the people. Of course, the church, that there was a church which was there to give us company, attracted me. But what disturbed me greatly was the attitude of the church to me as a priest from India. There were many occasions when we felt miserable due to our color and due to our nationality. Even in the church, when I used to serve Holy Communion, there were people from Britain, from London, from the UK, who would not accept communion from my hands. And there were many times when I conducted Holy Communion or when I exchanged kiss of peace as part of the Holy Communion service, people would accept the kiss of peace from me simply because I'm not from England, I'm a foreigner, I've come from somewhere, I'm an Indian, I'm an Asian, and so on and so forth. So I felt that I'm a migrant in a foreign land. And many times questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Why are people so racial and at times cruel in their dealings? Have flashed through my mind. But at the end of the day, we had to gather together ourselves and reassess our priorities and move forward with complete dependence on God the migrant. And today when I look back, I do not regret this experience of migration, which me and my family had to go through in a foreign land. This experience of migration taught us precious lessons in life, which we would not have learned otherwise. Realizing priorities in life, facing people with different attitudes and perspectives with grace, although I differ, but I can accept them with grace, accepting people who are different from me as they are, and above all, discovering God as beyond, but at the same time, who is traveling with the dejected and the despised people, granting them the needed strength to move forward in life. Now, many scholars have contributed a lot on this theme of migration. There are two ways in which many scholars look at this theme of migration, particularly from a psychological point of view. They would argue that one possibility of looking at the migrant experience as being in between two cultures. Being in between two cultures. Me, as an Indian, going to England, to UK, I'm in between. There comes a point as you move forward, move on in a foreign land, when you yourself ask the question, who am I? Am I really an Indian? Or am I British? Or am I in between? So one viewpoint which scholars, particularly psychologists, have put forward is some people who have gone as migrants when I use the word migrant, I'm not only talking about the migrant laborers. All of us in one way or the other are migrants because we have always moved from one place to the other. And this possibility of being in between two cultures is one way in which some migrants being in both cultures, not being in between, but being in both cultures. Being in a foreign land, you can be either in between or you can also be in both cultures. Now, I can look at myself when I was in London as pure an Indian and withdraw myself from the British culture. I can also look at myself as being in both. Having come to London, I should try my level best to adapt to the new situation, new context, although my roots are Indian. I can be in between or I can be in both. Now, when I look at the second point of view, which is put forward by psychologists, to look at this theme of migration, that I can be in both, is much more richer as far as I'm concerned. Because I live with the richness of complementarity and integration. I do not become myself a divided self, but rather I integrate myself into the new context, new culture. And I enjoy the richness of complementarity and integration by moving into a new culture. Now, living in between can lead to feeling alienated, marginalized, resulting in a victim mentality. But living in both can lead to a celebration of life, celebration of certain richness. The in both mentality can allow one to view a new societal home from a different perspective, that of an insider, outsider. This applies not only to the migrant, but also to minority groups in a society. When I adopt the insider-outsider viewpoint, I don't necessarily see things better than others, but I certainly attain a unique and valuable point of view. Now, understanding the migrant experience from a psychological point of view, as I have just narrated, that is, you can be either in between or you can be in both, is very vital. And that is what some people do. And I myself know many friends who have adopted the first view, that in between, and they have felt miserable. They have not achieved what they have gone for. But I have also seen people who have tried to adapt themselves to a new culture, being in both, and achieved for what they have gone. Now, therefore, understanding the migrant experience from a psychological point of view is very vital. As I said, physically it's exciting, but psychologically it is tormenting. But psychologically, it depends on how you look at it. Either you can be in between two cultures or you can be in both the cultures. When you are in both the cultures, you enjoy the richness of complementarity and integration. Now, although this psychological point of view is vital, for me as a theologian, as a student of the Bible, for almost 35 to 40 years now, teaching in different theological institutions, heading different centers, and now heading an organization which deals with the Bible. Viewing the issue of migration from a theological point of view is very powerful and is very much needed, which is hardly looked upon. Many a time, as I said, migration is looked at from a political or from a cultural angle, but from a theological angle is very seldom looked upon. How many of us have ever thought of God as a migrant God? God is omnipotent. God is omniscient. God is omnipresent. These are all big terminologies which we use in our theological colleges and in our lectures. But how many times have we thought of God as a migrant God who travels with us on the road, along with us who are migrants? Now, this is something which is very important for us to recognize and for us to realize. And therefore, a theological understanding of migration is very crucial and very powerful. And this is where I want to underline that the God of the Bible is a migrant God. He's omnipotent, I don't deny it. He's omniscient, I don't deny it. He's omnipresent, I don't deny it. But I want to add a very important, powerful dimension of the God of the Bible, and that is the God of the Bible is a migrant God. As I said earlier, a lot of our language about God is a language of distance. But this God of the Bible is also God of nearness. And it is in this context that we call the God of the Bible as a migrant God who journeys with us. What do I mean when I say God is a migrant God? And that is what we see in Jesus Christ, who loved the world so much. God loved the world so much, and he sent his son Jesus, and Jesus came and migrated into the far and distant country of our broken human existence, laid down his life on a cross so that we could be reconciled to him and migrate back to our homeland with God and enjoy renewed fellowship at all levels of our relationships. Reading the Christian tradition from a migrant perspective involves perceiving what God is doing in the world through Jesus Christ and understanding God's desire to cross over the barriers that divide and alienate our relationships. Now, biblical scholars identify 4 foundations of such a theology of migration. I would like to call it as a theology of migration. And many biblical scholars have identified 4 different ways or 4 different aspects of this theology of migration. Now, the first dimension of this theology of migration, I would use the Latin words which all of you are familiar with. The first one is a very common terminology we use, phrase, imago Dei, the image of God. And this is what biblical scholars call as crossing the problem-person divide, imago Dei. The second aspect of this theology of migration is the verbum Dei, verbum Dei, the word of God, meaning crossing the divine-human divide, the divine-human divide, the verbum Dei. The third dimension of this theology of migration is the missio Dei, the mission of God. And what does it do? It crosses the barrier between the human and the human, crossing the human-human divide. And finally, there is the visio Dei, the vision of God. And what does that aspect do? It crosses the country, kingdom of God divide. Now, let me explain these 4 aspects of the theology of migration as brief as possible. Now, all these foundations of the theology of migration, the imago Dei, the verbum Dei, missio Dei, the visio Dei, all these foundations give expression to the ways in which God reconciles the world to God's self. breaking down divisions in our relationships, helping us to understand how God moves in our world and how God expects us to respond to his move on this earth. Now, the notion of the image of God, Imago Dei, emerges in the earliest pages of the Bible, of the scripture, where we learn that human beings are not just we label them, but rather people who bear God's own image and likeness. These people on the move are only seen as migrants or workers, or as lawbreakers, or as aliens, or as criminals. Then their suffering doesn't make any impact on us. We don't feel for them because they're different. They have nothing to do with me. I have nothing to do with them. But the moment I look at them as part of Imago Dei, the image of God, then their suffering becomes my suffering. When I was at the Ecumenical Christian Center, in one seminar, which I just cannot remember which exact seminar it was, but some of these thoughts remain in me off and on. It was customary, which I think which Father Dr. Matthew Chandrakundal also does today, that every seminar is inaugurated by the director of the center. And in a seminar on biblical hermeneutics, I, as the director of the center, had to inaugurate, and in which I made a statement about God. I said about the Bible, I said something, but I also tried to define the word the other. Who am I? I told them I am part of the image of God. But I also asked the audience, who is the other? The other who lives next to you, the other who works for you, the other who you see on the road. Who is the other? Is that other another who has nothing to do with me? I have nothing to do with them or with her. Or is the other a part of myself? Now that is where the theme of Imago Dei becomes very significant. The fact that I am created in God's image is the same thing when I look at another person who is different from me. He or she is also part of God's image. And just because he and me are created in the image of God, he is part of me and I am part of him. And therefore, when I look at a migrant worker suffering today, when I look at that little child lifting the sheet from the dead body of his own mother, I was moved to tears. It affected me because I said to myself, that lady who did not do anything on her own or for her own or on her own, because of starvation, she went somewhere to work. And because of this COVID pandemic, she had to return back to her homeland. She had to travel, walk without food and water. And finally she died. And here is that little child who doesn't know that her mother is no more. Now I could have just avoided. I could have just said to myself, hell with it. I didn't want to see it. No. I saw that picture again and again and again. Several questions came to my mind. All because of this realization of Imago Dei. As I am created on God's own image, the other is also created in God's image. And because the other is created in God's image, as I am created in God's image, I am connected to the other, and the other is connected to me. He or she is a part of me, as I am a part of him or part of her. Otherwise, when you look at the migrant laborers traveling in the trains or walking through the roads, it won't make any impact on you. They're different. They have nothing to do with me. I have nothing to do with them. Why should I bother? Some of my colleagues in my conversation, they say, I don't open the TV now. I don't put the switch on the TV now because everything is on COVID, everything on migration. I do not want to see suffering. Now, it all depends on how you look at them. If you look at them as criminals, as aliens, as lawbreakers, as workers, as poor people, then their suffering doesn't make any claim on you or impact on you. But on the other hand, when you look at them as part of Imago Dei, part of the image of God, as I am part of God's image, they're also part of God's image. I get automatically connected to them as they get automatically connected to me. Although I do not know that lady who died on the platform, still that lady's the face and the little child, 1-year-old child, lifting the sheet from the dead body of the mother, shaking the dead body, will never leave me because I feel for her. I feel for the child. All because of this theme of Imago Dei. So there is a problem of alienation. But at the same time, this problem of alienation can be overcome from a theological perspective if you bring in this Imago Dei dimension of the theme of migration. Now, the second theological notion central to the immigration debate is what I call the verbum Dei, V-E-R-B-U-M, verbum Dei, the word of God. Now, when I use the word of God, I'm not talking about the Bible, the written word. The word is the word, Jesus Christ. In the incarnation, as all of us affirm, that God in Jesus crosses the divide that exists between divine and the human. He crosses the divide. There was a divide between the human and the divine. But through the cross, or in Jesus, God crosses the divide that exists between the divine and the human. And what Jesus does in the incarnation, God migrates to a place of division and dissension. God migrates into a territory marked by death and the demeaning treatment of human beings. In Matthew's account, God not only takes on human flesh and migrates into a world, but God actually becomes a refugee. When his family flees political persecution and escapes into Egypt. Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 15. In other words, Jesus assumes the human condition of the most vulnerable among us, undergoing hunger, thirst, rejection, injustice, walking the way of the cross, overcoming the forces of death that threaten human life. Jesus enters into the broken territory of human experience and offers his own wounds in solidarity with those who are in pain. The Jesus story opens up for many migrants a reason to hope, especially in what often seems like a hopeless predicament. So this dimension of migration, the verbum Dei, Jesus in his incarnation, crossing the divide between the divine and the human, is something which is very, very significant in order to understand the theme of migration from a theological point of view. The third theological notion that I would like to briefly touch upon is the theme of the Missio Dei. Again, very popular phrase which you often hear in the theological discourse. What does mission of God or Missio Dei do? Common human divide. The Verbum Dei crosses the human divine, and the Missio Dei crosses the human to human divide. In other words, the Missio Dei proclaims a God of life by building up a culture, a civilization of love. Now, Missio Dei is what Jesus always stood for. I've come to preach good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, and so on and so forth. It proclaims the God of life, and the aim of Missio Dei is building up a civilization, a culture of love. And this again is a very important theological dimension of the theme of migration. And you and I, as migrants, we are called to be engaged in Missio Dei, to proclaim liberty to the captives and to the poor, and to lift up the poor, and to build a culture and a civilization of love. So, Imago Dei, Verbum Dei, Missio Dei, and there is one more theological notion that I would like to talk about, and that is Visio Dei, vision of God. Visio Dei, or vision of God. Now, when you talk about the vision of God, we deeply appreciate what is happening in our country, in our countries, in our local contexts. But at the same time, we also realize that there is something beyond our country, beyond our own context, that we need to struggle towards. In other words, a mission of reconciliation. We are all bordered. We have all boundaries. We have all borders. But it is also important to cross the borders that define us, that limit us, and work towards a culture of reconciliation which defines the body of Christ. And when you work towards this vision of God, the culture of reconciliation, the new heaven and the new earth, if you want to use a biblical terminology, then when you look at migration or migrants, you tried your level best to work towards the reconciliation, a culture of reconciliation in which those people are also included in the mission of God. So therefore, when you look at the theology of migration as Imago Dei, Verbum Dei, Missio Dei, and Visio Dei, and you may add on, had I time, I would have added a few more, but 4 different notions of the theology of migration. I want to conclude that theology is not mere information. For many of us, theology is information. In one of my classes, I asked myself this question. I asked my students this question: what is theology for you? One of them answers, theology gives me information about God. But for me, when you struggle through theology, through these 4 different notions of theology of migration, for me, theology offers not just information. Of course, it does give information about God, but it gives you a new imagination. And I want to call it as a critical theological imagination. Not mere imagination, wishing the way you want. A critical theological imagination. That is what theology provides. So when you look at the theme of migration, and this is exactly what theology provides, and you look at it from a theological perspective, a new critical theological imagination. And what is this new critical theological imagination? It is a way of thinking that keeps human issues at the center of the debate. And it also reminds us that our own existence is migratory. We are pilgrims. Our existence as pilgrim people is migratory in nature. So in other words, Christian discipleship leads us to overcome all that divides us in order to reconcile our relationships, reminding us that the more difficult walls to cross are the ones that exist in the heart of each of us. It's not out there, but it is within us. We're unable to cross these divides by ourselves. And that is where Imago Dei, Verbum Dei, Missio Dei, and Visio Dei come to our rescue. Where does Christian faith lie? Christian faith lies ultimately in the one who migrated from heaven to earth, and through his death and resurrection passed over from death to life. God self identifies as a wandering God, as all of us know. To read 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 6, it reads, I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. This wandering aspect of God is one of the reasons Samuel is so concerned about David's desire to build a temple for Yahweh. My dear friends, God is a God of the journey. God is a God on the road. And this is very clearly expressed in God's journey with his people as cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Exodus chapter 13, verses 20 to 22. I may not be wrong if I call God as the exiled God. The glory of God leaves the temple, and God joins the people in exile, in the captivity. So God as a migrant God is clearly seen in the Bible, both in the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament. I do not have time to go through it in detail. But what is most important is, the first and most obvious thing that should be said is that our life's experiences are not to be negated, but need to be brought with us in our reading of scripture, our prayers, and our engagement with the wider world. Some of our life's experiences are more significant than others' experiences, and therefore have become more formative. But we need to make such experiences productive. In my own case, being a migrant has been a blessing. It has made me aware of loss and gain. It has made me open to the other, to those who are strange and different. It has made me somewhat comfortable with ambiguity and liminality. And as I have already indicated, it has brought me into contact with the God on the road. That is what has happened in my migratory experience. Along with accepting the other as they are, this migratory experience has brought me into contact with the God on the road, rather than simply the static God in the temple. God for me is not static any longer, but rather God is a God on the road, God on the journey. Now at this juncture, some of us may feel, what on earth has all of this to do with me? I was never a migrant in the sense of what we see today in our TVs and read in the newspapers. That migrant experience is not my own. Although I've lived in other countries, that kind of experience is not my own. So what does it have to do with me as a person? I'm dealing with it from a theological perspective. So let me make this point. Any experience that disassembles us, that strips us bare and takes us out of our comfort zone, can be approximate to the migrant experience. I don't need to be a migrant laborer who I see on the TV. to become a migrant. But to become a migrant, from a theological perspective, when I look at a migrant, any experience that disassembles me, that strips me bare, that takes me out of my relationship, my comfort zone, is equivalent to a migrant experience. Whether that be a relationship breakdown, loss of a loved one, a job loss, or a health crisis, it can be called as a migrant experience. Now, dear friends, it is at this point that we need, forgive me if I use some of these disturbing terminologies. It's at this juncture, at this point, that we need a messy God, not a tidy God. A messy God, as I am messy, as I am not tidy. We need a messy God rather than a tidy God. We need God in the midst of our ambiguity, pain, lament, confusion, and questioning. We need a God at the margins. We need the migrant God. We need to make at times of vulnerability productive, to allow them to help us realize our true condition in the world and open us to respond to others who are suffering or on the margins. As I conclude, Bishop Leslie Newbigin, who was a very popular bishop who was with us in India, in the CSI, he always used to define spirituality by giving 3 different ways of looking at it. He used to tell often, and he has written in his books also, that you can look at spirituality as a pilgrim progress spirituality, number 1. Pilgrim progress spirituality. Now, what is pilgrim progress spirituality? You running away from the world as a pilgrim, as John Bunyan has pictured in his book, The Pilgrim Progress. You run away from the world to the other world. A pilgrim progress spirituality. And then the bishop would say there is another type of spirituality that some of us fall into. That is the Jonah spirituality. Prophet Jonah spirituality. We go right into the world, leaving completely the other side of the coin. We go straight into Nineveh, forgetting who has sent you. The Jonah model of spirituality. And the third model, Bishop Leslie Newbigin always used to powerfully argue that what we need to cultivate is the cross model of spirituality. The cross model of spirituality, the vertical and the horizontal dimension of spirituality. Identifying with God, at the same time identifying with the world in healthy tension. You cannot just say that I am with God without being in the world. You cannot say that I am in the world without being with God. A healthy tension of spirituality is what we need, Bishop Leslie Newbigin used to argue. So, my dear friends, as I conclude, I sympathize with the migrant laborers, migrant workers who are struggling to live their life, how long they would live, what the next day for them. Many questions must be flowing through the minds. I sympathize with them. I feel one with them. I feel for them. And many a time I wish I were one of the travelers along with them in the train, taking part in the suffering. It's all because of these 4 dimensions of the theology of migration: Imago Dei, Verbo Dei, Missio Dei, and Visio Dei. And as I said, I want to re-emphasize as I conclude, the God of the Bible who I have discovered, and I'm still discovering, is not a God of distance, but a God of nearness. The God of the Bible is a migrant God among migrant people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, our respected dear Dr. Mani Chako, for this fantastic, elaborate and wonderful presentation. And many of the people have already commented on the chat box how they felt about it and how they were inspired by your inspiring talk. Here we see that true spirituality is biblical. God himself or herself or itself is a migrant God. Inner or emotional, spiritual, psychological migration is more complex than the physical migration.
Yes.
And in his presentation, he was firmly affirming wider contextual aspects, deep biblical truths, and existent personal experiences in London and in different parts of his life. And in that sense, God himself is a migrant God. The in-between experiences are challenging. So the inside and the outside of experience, and then he was coming to the New Testament, the incarnation of the Word,
Yes.
God dwelling among us as a migrant God. Then he was focusing on the four notions about the theology of migration: imago Dei, verbum Dei, missio Dei, and visio Dei. So in that way, the paper was clear. Still, if somebody has questions, 1 minute is left.
Maybe I think we can have at least a few questions, maybe 10 minutes. Definitely we need to give such a wonderful and stunning talk. I must say that, the text and the context, Reverend Dr. Mani Chako has given us a beautiful integration. And from the already Dr. Johnson Thomas Gutti has already said, many of us through the chat box was saying that, the migration of the people, the movement of the people now can be compared with the Exodus events. And then, they were really finding it. So I would say that this is a stunning climax to our series of lectures. And I really thank Dr. Johnson Thomas Gutti for bringing Reverend Dr. Mani Chako. And actually, my predecessor, I am now sitting on his that former chair. So I'm very happy to be here. So my question would be that, so I come from the tradition of science, and this migration, I find it so fascinating because, as human beings, some around, it is depending upon which calculation we take. Maybe it is 100,000, 1 lakh to 3 lakh years. The Homo erectus, that means, the Malawi, the African region, we just stood up. Then Homo habilis, and then, we were moving. And then we came to so the whole, and there are, it seems that from the evolutionary biology, it says that, there are waves of, or there were waves of migration from this place. And then we can trace back by the genetics, the original father, mother to that of from the African. So this is something which I never could, though we heard about Exodus and other theological perspective, but this migrant God and a migrating people, or a migrant God for. So can we also relate? And I'm absolutely sure that you will say that the possibility. So maybe that also, we are in the process of pilgrimage, we are in the process of migration, and nobody is here in this world as static, but the pilgrimage. So what would be your observations connecting this biblical theology to evolutionary biology?
Well, as you rightly said in your statement, I'm not a scientist, so I did not get into the theory of evolution and so on and so forth. But the fact that I would like to underline is We are pilgrims. We are transitory. Pilgrims. We are migrants. And that is why I call myself as a migrant. It's not just because I move from one place to the other, but it's also because I know my being here is not permanent. I am only a pilgrim on the road, on the way, on the journey. So I would re-emphasize what you have said, that I am a pilgrim and therefore I am a migrant.
Thank
Yes,
you.
any other questions? If you have a pressing question, please come up. Anybody?
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, just one question quickly.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you,
Balu.
Dr. Mani Chako, for the thought-provoking and challenging presentation. I very much like the way you addressed the present scenario and its theological response after you addressed psychological and emotional aspects. Elsewhere, I argued that God is vulnerable God. And so I like the terms that you used. God is not static, God is dynamic, God is on the road, God is on the journey. So I'm very much syncing with your theological thought. My only question is on the center, because you said that theology gives us a critical theological imagination
Yes.
that focuses on human issues at its center.
Yes.
All right. The question is, the human issues are changing, migration, and one more. It's constantly changing, one or the other. But can we or should we reformulate or reimagine our theology on the changing human issues?
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Balu, for that very intriguing question. That is exactly what I meant when I used the word critical theological imagination. Our theology should never be static. It should always change. Critically, imaginatively, as per the issues that we confront day to day. Otherwise, we are making God distant again. We are making God distant again. We go back to the old rhythm of our language, God language, that God is distant. God is not distant. God is not the God of distance. God is the God of nearness. And in order to re-emphasize that, we need to critically, theologically imagine as we face and as we confront issues from time to time. So our idea of God may still change as we face new issues. That is exactly what I meant by the term critical theological imagination. I'm with you in that, Balu.
So we have the last question by Joy Hope.
Oh,
And
Joy.
yes, yes.
So nice to see you, Joy. Wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, after many
Again,
years,
one of my favorite students again. Wonderful. Thank you.
one of my favorite professors too. Thank you so much, sir. Actually, coming back to previous question, I also was thinking, actually, the human experiences, whether it's changing or our perspective was changing the experiences, because human is the center of theology and God is the center of. You already explained how the image of God is not other than what we are experiencing, like your personal experience of being immigrant. It's how you see God also immigrant. I think it is it's in a way I feel we can't think of God beyond our experience. That is my personal view. So what do you think of that? Sometimes we put ourselves away God and then we withdraw ourselves from God. So I have problem with that theology, to see God beyond our experience or beyond our perspective, or putting God as something beyond our human center.
Well, my very definition of God explains your question. God is a migrant God. God is not beyond our problems and our experiences. God is on the road, on the journey, traveling with us along with our experiences. And I would say, without the experiences, we cannot fathom God and who God is. It is our experiences which make us understand who God really is. And that definition of God may change as we go through different experiences, as we move on in life. I can go on narrating. Joy has listened to my classes, several stories I would have shared. I mean, I would not have given this lecture. I would not have given this kind of a lecture 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Along Jamir knows, Subramani knows, and other my colleague, my student friends who are here know about it. Johnson knows. But now it is all out of struggle, and it is the human experience which makes me understand who God really is. Otherwise, my understanding of God would be a myth, mythical. It won't make any sense to me. When I say so powerfully that my God is a God of nearness, not a God of distance, but God who is a migrant God, who is on the road with me on my journey, that is out of a struggle, and I'm still struggling. And in that struggle, my definition of God also may change, Mr. Balu, as I face different experiences in life journey.
So thank you so much, Achan. And dear friends, as we are migrants in this world, and we are all on the road. God is a migrant God, and he, she, or it is on the road. So I would like to quote from Jyoti Sahi. According to Jyoti Sahi, we do not need a static or distant God, but rather we need a God or a Jesus who walks through the roads of India.
Absolutely.
So in that way, a migrant God or a walking God, a God who comes to our context is our priority in today's context. Such a God is a great God whom we can rely. So with these words, I conclude and I appreciate our respected Dr. Mani Chacko. Let us all wave at him.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Such a
sir.
joy to be with you all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
May the migrant God continue to lead us through in our journey of life.
So friends, don't leave. Now we are handing over the time to Father Dr. Matthew Chandran Kundayal as it is the concluding session. Please wait a few more minutes.
Thank you, Mani Chacko Achan, for this stunning climax. You have wonderfully presented the theme, and probably as I already said, then the text and the context. And I also thank Johnson Thomas Kutty for bringing you in. I have tried you several times for some programs, but I think you were busy. But Thomas Kutty could bring you, and I think I should find the right person to get you.
That's
So,
because of the technology.
yes, that is also true. And I am happy that yes, we have an excellent number of scholars are with us. Almost 70 of them are here, and this is almost 11 programs we have already conducted. And 11 means 12 people were 11 means double 22, so 23, so 25, almost 25 presentations we already had. And see, all this is because of the imagination and connectivity of Dr. Johnson Thomas Kutty. So he was I think in a night we were corresponding through Facebook Messenger. So I was also the idea of sharing something for the text and the context, the biblical hermeneutics interpretation, and that was the time Johnson Thomas Kutty contacted me, and I also shared with him. So it came as a kind of a fusion of our activities. Then we have incorporated many others, like Jay Chitra was there, then the ECC staff, our deputy director Minlun, then the program secretary Sukumar, and we have other scholars. So we were all thinking together. So I must say to all of you, and especially to Johnson Thomas Kutty, for this wonderful connectivity, bringing such a big range of scholars like Joy from Germany, and then from United States, and Myanmar, Nepal, and all our neighboring countries, and then far away from Chicago and many other places. So it is a global activity, and also not only of the Indian Christians, but I think as Christians, not only belonging to one particular church, but I think it is a holistic complementary account we have made. And taking the words of Manichako Achan, that we were all migrating. we were all in pilgrimage. We were all in our travel together, holding our hands together. So that is what I was experiencing. So this was a splendid climax, and this migration of us going together, holding our hands, our faith together as brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, in the faith, and also our own rationality. So it was simply an enjoyable, thought-provoking, and a committed Christian experience of discipleship. So maybe if some of you could say a few words, would be it is open to all of you. So if you have some interesting comments or observations, then you can put on the reactions, and then let us express it. Not maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes, not more than that long, but we can hear we can share.
Dr. Balu.
Yes, just wanted to thank you for the opportunity that you gave me to share my presentation. The moment I received about the flyer that to be hosted by ECC a few weeks ago, so immediately I communicated with Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti and asked him if I can present a paper. And in no time he said yes, start preparing. But I didn't realize it's coming so soon. So I'm really grateful for that. But more than that, it's a very learning experience. And I encouraged my friends, students to join, faculty team to join and listen. Because I always wanted to be learning through ECC. Years ago, I have a very good memory of attending ECC while I was studying at SciEx in Bangalore. So now it's a wonderful opportunity. So I thank, and almost all the papers are very good in terms of quality, reflection, and there is a healthy way of asking questions. Some of the questions that I faced were really challenging. So particularly the finale was amazing. Dr. Mani Chako's presentation was something that covers the very core issue that we are facing today. So thank you all for the opportunity that you gave me, both to present and also to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Balu. Come again to ECC, not only through the screen, but you can directly, since you are also from Bangalore. Most welcome with your students.
Well, I live in Chennai, but yeah, I hope to. Thank you.
Sister, you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
Who is
Sister Prema.
Sister Prema. Yes, please.
I just want to congratulate all the organizers for arranging this program, which I thought it will not be possible because of the lockdown. But you made it possible for us to come together from different parts of the world. And all the papers were very inspiring, thought-provoking in its own way, and it was contextualized. And special thanks to Dr. Mani Chako, which was the summation of all the papers, and you culminated the contextual spirituality in your paper from the biblical perspective, both from Old and the New Testament. And my special thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you, Sister Prema. We were planning to come together on May 7 and 8. Unfortunately, that was the time, the corona quarantine closed down and all. So we couldn't. And also Sister Prema was also part of our team who was organizing, and your presence and also the way you have presented, that is also excellent. And then as we know that, we were discussing on Bible, and today which I also forgot to make it more visible, that Dr. Manichako is the General Secretary of the Bible Society of India. So in that way, that is also in another way a climax. We have the scholar, the General Secretary of the Biblical Society of India is also here. So that way, thank you once again, Dr. Manichako. Anyone else?
So friends, it was a wonderful occasion for us to have together. In all the sessions, above 50 people attended. Today it crossed about 80 people. That shows how much people are interested in biblical understanding, and we are from the core of our hearts, we thank all the presenters and all the participants who were coming and encouraging ECC and Father Matthew Chandran Kunnel and all other dignitaries who are here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think maybe the all observations, comments are already over. So let me go on to a few other interesting things. We will be publishing the presentations made by the scholars as a book, and the deadline, the scholars need to give us by July 31st. And this is what Dr. Johnson Thomascuti was saying. And probably maybe within a few months, we will be able to either ECC alone or with the Fortress or other publications, we will be able to bring it out as a contextualized, wider contextualized biblical spirituality. So which you could also share and then buy. Then another program we are choking out, which I already informed the General Secretary of the Bible Society of India. So this was actually for the scholars. So we want to bring together this biblical experience, the interpretation and also understanding the text and the context together with the faithful, the ordinary faithful. So therefore, we are also planning with Dr. Johnson Thomascuti. He has already contacted many scholars, so that we will again have another 20 lectures by very prominent scholars belonging to different regions, different churches, and also complementing the gender. So mostly we will be from the Indian context. So that will be beginning on June 18th, June 18, 6 p.m. to 7:30, as we did the same. So that will be continuing. So June 18th, you can also join maybe your students, and then as pastors, all those who you could convey to the others, and let us see that how many of people could be accommodated. We can go also into Facebook, so that more larger numbers could also be accommodated. So that is one program which we are planning ahead in biblical. We also have a few other programs, and one of the prominent is the dialogue. As we as human beings, not only belonging to Christianity, but we also have many other religious traditions, and especially one of the very ancient is that of Buddhism. And we have many Buddhist scholars, and then suffering, and then we were all suffering these days in quarantine, and then also this corona, the economic crisis, so many dimensional sufferings we are undergoing. So therefore we have already made another webinar or a seminar conference that is on suffering, from the perspectives of Buddhism and Christianity. We have already conducted one, and then there will be again a number of such lectures. One is already done by the, and we are with the CBCI Commission for Dialogue and Ecumenism, and also with the Dalai Lama Foundation for Tibetan Culture and Philosophy. So we are collaborating with them, and we have the next session on 2nd June. These are also done by great scholars from both the Buddhist tradition as well as the Christian traditions, incorporating from different churches. So that is the another one. So there are a few other such programs, and then we have already recorded many of your emails and phone numbers. We will definitely will be reaching out to you by email and other ways. So this is another important aspect we want to inform you. Anyone else? Minlun?
Word of thanks by Reverend Sukumar.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Manichako Achan, for an excellent and an amazing presentation. Thank you for exploring and unpacking the concepts of Missio Dei and Imago Dei. We really enjoyed your presentation on behalf of all of us. Thank you so much for adventurously exploring to know the messy God. Thank you for challenging and sparking our minds. Thanks to the mastermind behind all these series of creative lectures, our director, Father Matthew Chandran Kunil. Thank you so much, Father, for your brilliant idea to focus all these series of lectures, which are profoundly creative, that made a massive impact in our minds and thoughts. Thank you so much, Father. Thanks to our Deputy Director, Thangminlun Wepe, for your hard work and dedication for all the technicalities. Thanks to all the participants for presenting yourself, for your time and patience. Thank you so much indeed.
I also want to thank especially Dr. Johnson Thomas Kuti. He was the one who designed and also contacted the people and moderating especially this session as well as in the first beginning. So therefore, you know, Thomas Kuti will also be taking for this biblical other wider contextualized biblical hermeneutics. So we will work together again as a team. So we, four of us who are here as a team, we will continue. We need your blessings, support, and connectivity. Thank you once again to Manichako Achan. We are all migrants. We are all in pilgrimage, looking for a migrant God. Thank you.